Let's begin with aggregate demand. It's the first component of aggregate demand, aggregate supply analysis. And aggregate demand, when we talk about things in aggregate, we talk about everything together. And demand is just demand for goods and services. So aggregate demand is really the demand for all the goods and services, or all of the demand for goods and services in an economy. What does that really mean? In practical terms, it means really the right-hand side of what we call the national income identity. The national income identity is sort of like supply and demand anyway. This is everything produced in your economy, the natural production, GDP, and this is the demand for all of the stuff in your economy. This includes all of the local or domestic demand, and this reflects all of the international demand for your goods and services, right? Our exports are just things that are demanded from us from other countries. Therefore, it's demand overseas for our goods and services. Now, aggregate demand is really all of this stuff, but it's also the things that affect some of these things, okay? So for example, aggregate demand would be all of the demand for all of these things. But if we want to think about what moves aggregate demand, we have to think about what moves consumption, investment, and net exports. Government spending is moved by votes in Congress. So it's what we call an exogenous variable. These are the three that are really affected by other variables in the economy. In particular, the other things moving aggregate demand are going to be taxes, which we'll call T. In particular, if you think about it, an increase in taxes is going to cause a decrease in consumption because you have more taxes that you pay, you have less money to use for consumption, or if the tax is on the good you're consuming, like a gasoline tax, you might consume less gasoline. So higher taxes tends to lower consumption. Similarly, higher taxes tends to lower investment, right? If you tax my investment opportunities, I earn less profit, I invest less, and also if you raise my taxes, I have less money to invest, and therefore investment declines. Or firms have less money to invest in their own businesses and investment declines. It turns out that taxes can also lead or they can also affect net exports. Okay, we're not going to get into that now, but it could lead to a decline in net exports. Another thing that affects consumption, investment, and net exports would be the interest rate. In general, we think of I as the nominal interest rate. The nominal interest rate, if the interest rate goes up, similarly, it'll lower consumption, it'll lower investment, and it'll lower net exports. When the Fed raises interest rates, my credit card becomes more expensive. It's more expensive to buy a car, buy a durable good, buy a house. All of the interest rate hikes will lower consumption. Similar reasons it'll lower investment. So a firm investing in its own business needs to borrow money, so higher interest rates makes that more expensive. And there are reasons it can affect the exchange rate and all kinds of things to make net exports drop as well. Now, interest rates are determined in large part by the nominal money stock. So I'll add it separate. And money, if you increase money, the amount of money in an economy, it will lower interest rates. But also it's very intuitive to think if you increase the amount of money in the economy, people will consume more, they'll have more money to invest, and it can also lead to an increase in net exports through the exchange rate mechanism. So higher money will increase those things. Higher taxes decreases those things, higher interest rates decreases those things. So it's often very expedient to write aggregate demand using all of this in a very handy way. and we'll say aggregate demand is a function of consumption, investment, government spending, net exports. Then you also have money, taxes, and interest rates. I like to use the shorthand that increasing consumption increases aggregate demand, so I put a plus. Increasing investment increases aggregate demand, so I put a plus. Increasing government spending means more demand in the economy, hence a plus. Increase of net exports, those are demand from abroad for our goods, increases aggregate demand for our goods. Increasing money supply increases CI and NX, so it also increases. But increasing taxes and increasing the interest rate will lower NX, I, and C. Therefore, increasing these has a negative effect on aggregate demand. So I use a shorthand like this to capture all of that.